So Doom is just one of those games I could talk about like all day. Someone could give me a random topic or aspect to focus on and I could probably yarn about it until I bled from my asshole. I don't think I need to go into too much detail on what Doom is about. The story is simple. Boy meets demons, boy goes to hell, boy kills everything. It's one of the most iconic and influential first-person shooters of all time, and I'd argue even a bit of a household name. Collectively, throughout the years, it's without a doubt the game I've played the most in my life, especially on the PC, and its popularity also extended out to numerous different ports to other platforms. Most notably, in case in point, is the version released for the PlayStation in 1996 by Williams Entertainment. Chances are if you were a kid in the 90s, you'd probably played a Williams pinball machine at one time or another, and if you didn't, well, I guess your parents probably just hated you. Anyways, getting back to PlayStation Doom, it's often held in high regard as one of the best ports of the game ever made. And what's most interesting about it is the fact that it's basically melded the 4 original episodes of Ultimate Doom into one campaign, allowing you to play through roughly the same amount of levels with a few new inclusions here and there, and with a different appearance for the Cyber Demon and Spider Mastermind to make it seem like it flows better across the extended campaign. In fact, you don't even see the Spider Mastermind until the finale in Doom 2, replacing the Icon of Sin, which I guess was too much of a hassle to code into the new engine. Speaking of Doom 2, PlayStation Doom contains Doom 2 in most of its original glory, sans a couple of levels that are missing for what I think is technological reasons. So for people with a PlayStation who somehow hadn't played Doom at that point, to get a game that contained all 4 original episodes plus the sequel in one package is damn good value. But what I think makes this version of Doom even more unique is how much it differentiates itself from the PC version in terms of the tone and the general atmosphere. You'll still be moving through UAC facilities across hell and the invaded environments on Earth, but the completely redone sound effects and music makes the game feel completely different to its PC counterpart. Weapon and monster sound effects have all been completely redone, sounding a lot more realistic in a sense, and I'm sure the sound effect they've used for the plasma rifle is also the same sound effect used for the similar weapon in the Terminator films. PlayStation Doom's original creation, kind of, is the Nightmare Spectre, a darker, faster version of the Spectres that have twice as much health points, and if you thought Spectres were bullet sponges to begin with, well, you're gonna love these pricks. They do, if nothing more, keep in line with the shift in mood that this version is going for, and much like Doom 64 would eventually pull off, Doom on the PlayStation 1's tried to take a much more horror-based approach to the sound design and music, with the heavy metal-inspired tracks composed by Bobby Prince completely removed, now sounding much more akin to the kind of thing you'd see in a horror film. In fact, I think a lot of this stuff was even reused for Doom 64 a year later, and anyone who's played that game can agree that there's a definite tonal shift in the way it feels when playing through it, compared to classic Doom on the PC. Composed by a dude called Aubrey Hodges, what you've got here is a very dark and threatening soundtrack with bizarre, otherworldly metallic instruments and the distorted sound of crying, breathing, and creepy voices. Just the kind of thing a 12-year-old kid would love to hear before going to bed. I mean, here's a few examples. Check out the music for E1M3 and then the music used on the same level during PlayStation Doom. Now look, I'm not saying that the original Doom wasn't a horror game. I mean, Lord knows I had enough bad dreams as a kid from playing that game too much, but the music in the PlayStation version just takes the horror element to another level, turning it into raw nightmare fuel. And even now, as I'm playing through it as an adult, I keep hearing little tidbits here and there and couldn't help but think how creepy the whole thing sounded. This kind of carries across to the visuals as well, with the game having much darker lighting overall, as well as the use of coloured lighting during certain moments that makes the environment seem a lot creepier and ominous. That's about the only positive change from the PC to the PlayStation version, however, because it does truthfully in every other aspect look much worse. That's to be expected really, considering it's running on inferior hardware, and though most of the sprite work looks more or less the same, you're definitely going to notice a pretty big shift in fidelity pretty much across the board, from the heads-up display right through to weapon and enemy sprites. Another bummer is that they've had to shorten and simplify the level architecture in a few key areas, which becomes instantly noticeable if you're familiar with the layouts on the PC. Also, the omission of certain enemy types becomes obvious as well. Like I said though, the PS1 wasn't the best console in terms of hardware, so all of these changes are pretty much justified. And look, it doesn't change the gameplay all that much anyway. You will probably miss seeing the appearance of the Archvile in Doom 2, but it seems like they've made up for this by including enemies from Doom 2's lineup in Ultimate Doom, so you can expect to see the odd Mancubus or Revenant scattered around the first 3 episodes. Now obviously Doom's a first-person shooter, and despite using the gimped PS1 controller, it does play pretty well, all things considered. The default controls are kind of bollocks, but after you've got it working in the way that suits you the best, it is pretty easy to get into the rhythm of things and blaze through the levels without too much of an issue. PlayStation Doom is definitely a tougher game than it was on the PC, and I think that's a combination of playing with the controller, which feels like you're trying to solve a Rubik's Cube covered in Dorito dust, and also the moments when the frame rate decides to just drop down into single digits, usually when you're up against an insurmountable amount of enemies at once. The movement controls aren't amazing either. I mean, they're functional most of the time, though I did find myself getting stuck on walls and enemies a fair bit, more so than I remember it happening with Ultimate Doom. The player's turning speed is painfully slow too, and circle strafing isn't entirely smooth either, meaning you'll probably take a fair bit more damage than you used to. The lack of any kind of manual save system is kind of horse shit, and it can be pretty frustrating spending 5 minutes on a level then getting killed by some prick of a pinky demon and having to do it all over again. And if you are killed during a level, you of course restart that level with nothing but the pistol, which is about as effective as harsh language. Even with these problems though, this is a game that should always be played on the ultra-violent setting, otherwise you're just kind of wasting your time and literally losing your gamer cred by the second if you're not. Most importantly, the ebb and flow of quality from level to level is going to coincide with what part of the original games you're playing. I mean, Episode 4 sucked in Ultimate Doom and it still sucks now in Doom on the PlayStation. Some of the levels in Doom 2, like the pit and the abandoned mines, are also still utterly woeful, and it also doesn't help that you're now playing through them on a 2-decade-old controller. Other changes I noticed are niggling and bordering on just being nitpicky, like how it takes slightly longer to swap through weapons now, and also how the hitbox for the player seems to be larger. Having the super shotgun now taking up the 4th weapon slot instead of sharing it with the 3rd also kind of threw me off when I was trying to select the chain gun, rocket launcher and the plasma rifle, because I'm so used to them being set at 4, 5 and 6 instead of 5, 7 and 8. But again, I'm just being a nitpicking asshole, and this isn't the kind of thing that affects the game overall in a negative way. I think when push comes to shove, I'd still say play the PC version over this because the original is always the best. But this is still a really unique port in the sense that whilst it did take everything that made the original so good, it's also still managed to take a spin on the whole formula, do its own thing in a lot of ways, and still come out looking pretty good in the end. The ports for the Jaguar, the 32X and the 3DO were all horrible train wrecks, but the PlayStation port for its time really stood out amongst the rest, and kind of stood up to the industry and proved that in the right hands, PC games could be ported to consoles and not be monumental failures. Like I said too, considering you're getting almost 60 something levels to play through in a single package is really good value, and the limitation of playing the game without manual saves ultimately makes the whole thing a lot more challenging. And if that's not enough for you, Sonny Jim, they also ported the final Doom levels as well in similar fashion. Neither of these games are put on any kind of pedestal in terms of value. I mean, you'll probably pay about 20 or 30 bucks for a copy off eBay. And there's games that are less old and more expensive, so in terms of the bang for your buck here, it's money well spent. But look, if playing it in this form just doesn't cut it for you, well, guess what? You're in luck, because someone's gone and created a mod for Doom called PSX Doom, which is the entire recreation of the PlayStation version within the Doom engine, which runs silky smooth in any source port. With full mouse and keyboard support and improved visuals and frame rate, this is the best way to play the game if you just want to experience the alterations they've made to the game and don't want to struggle with a low resolution and a dusty controller. It's also a lot easier than playing it on the console because of just how easier it is with the mouse and keyboard. Doom on the PC though is always going to be the king to me. I'll never forget killing a cyber demon or a spider mastermind for the first time, acquiring the rocket launcher or the BFG, or seeing that horrifying endgame image of the Earth coming under attack. These are moments that are etched in my brain for the rest of my life. Doom on the PlayStation might seem like a sheep in wolf's clothing if that makes sense, but it's done the best it can do with what it had on offer. And the unique approach it's taken to the sound and music, making it much more of a horror game, makes it worth playing for anyone who considers themselves a fan of the series. And let's face it, any Doom is a good Doom.